she was always pretty lucky about the musicians she had around her. The first piano player I ever heard her work with was a girl called Dot Hill. And Dot was superb. And the next piano player she had was perhaps the greatest outside of Teddy Wilson that she ever worked with, a guy by the name of Bobby Henderson, who died a couple of years ago up in Albany, but was absolutely one of the fine people in Billie's life. He was her first real boyfriend, and a gentleman every which way, and a wonderful musician. And they worked together off and on uptown for about 3 years, until actually Billie finally joined Basie's band the spring of 1937.
And that sort of made her famous in a sense because she was exposed to a larger audience.
She was exposed to a much larger audience, but already some of her records had made it with more than just a jazz following. Because in, I guess it was in 1936, we recorded I Cried for You. And Billie only sang one chorus on these records, you know. Or maybe she'd come back for a final 8 bars or something. But usually she was just, I Cried for You starts with the most beautiful Johnny Hodges chorus possible. And this record sold something like 15,000, which was a giant hit for Brunswick in those days.
Those days was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it was a giant hit. And, I mean, most records that made money sold around 3,000 or 4,000. I mean, it was just terrible to think of what record sales were like in those terrible days when radio had wiped out the record business.
I guess at a session just around that time she did Mean to Me, which was one of the first with Lester Young.
Well,
and that was quite a famous relationship.
Yes, well, this was one of the things. We had so much luck in these sessions with Teddy and Billie, because who the sidemen were depended very much on what good bands were in town. And if Ellington was in town, you'd find a Johnny Hodges or a Harry Carney or
Cootie Williams.
Or Cootie Williams or some of the other great sidemen with backing Billie and Teddy. But when Basie came to New York in October of 1936, this is when everything changed, because when Billie got together with 3 people, Lester Young, Buck Clayton, Freddie Green, and I have to say 2 others who were terribly important, Walter Page and Joe Jones. This set Billie as probably the most unique jazz singer of her generation. There was an interplay between Lester Young and Buck and Billie that was, you know, unique in music. I don't believe we've ever gotten this kind of interplay in the years since Billie's prime, you know, in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, it was a remarkable unity of conception there. One thing that strikes me when I listen to the records that Billie made during those days is that in later years, of course, her life became very tragic, and her songs often became sad. But these songs, the ones that she recorded in the 30s, are basically happy tunes. And
there are only a couple of exceptions on this album. One is the first title, God Bless the Child. This is a very interesting song. Of course, God Bless the Child, who's got his own, was a phrase that Billie got from her grandmother. But the whole structure of the song, both lyrics and musically, were by Arthur Herzog, a marvelous guy who's still living in Detroit and who has never gotten proper credit for it. Arthur was a good songwriter and a good poet, and he loved Billie's singing, and was of enormous help in this day, because he had a little flat on 7th Avenue between 13th and 14th Street in New York, and I was down there the night that Billie and Arthur worked this thing out. I don't really mind Billie getting sort of sole credit for it, because Billie, you know, deserved everything she could get. but actually Arthur Herzog should have a lion's share of the credit for this wonderful song. The other two more rather gloomy songs. One is Gloomy Sunday, which was supposed, according to the press agents of that period, to cause waves of suicide throughout Europe when it was heard.
Hungarian suicide.
Hungarian suicide. And the other was Fanny Brice's classic, My Man. But Billie, everything that on this album that Billie sang, All of Me, You've Changed, Them, Their Eyes, Miss Brown to You, which we've mentioned before, I Cried for You, and The Man I Love. She made masterpieces of them all. These are among the greatest sides that she ever made, and I think we ought to have a lot of fun having this record listened to by people who only know of Billie Holiday through the movie.